Now, Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has renewed her calls for another referendum on Scottish independence. She's been celebrating with her newly elected SNP members of Parliament in Dundee today. And in a phone call with Boris Johnson, she made it clear that she believes that the general election results in Scotland give her a clear mandate for another referendum. Well, I'm joined now by Akash Paun. He's the Senior Fellow at the Institute for Government. Afternoon to you, Akash.
Hi there, good afternoon.
You think this is heading on a collision course, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, the UK and Scottish governments are both very clear in their position. The SNP, as you say, is adamant that it does have a mandate now to hold a second referendum. Boris Johnson's very clear that he's not going to authorise that. And what we know from the 2014 precedent and from what the Scottish government has itself said more recently, the path to a clearly legal and legitimate referendum does run via Westminster. So in the end, agreement would have to be reached almost certainly on the terms of that referendum between the two governments.
Yeah, but if it's in his gift, isn't it, to grant it? If he says no, he says no, it's not happening.
The legal position is generally understood. I mean, it's never been tested in the courts, I would add, but the general understanding is that if the Scottish Parliament were to legislate for a referendum without having reached agreement first with the UK government, then any such initiative might well be struck down or blocked in the courts, because it would relate to the constitution, the union between England and Scotland, which is a matter for Westminster. So most people do understand that to be the legal position, yeah, that Westminster can just say no. But the point that we've made in our paper on this subject that's just been published is that possibly in the short run that would work. Yes, you can hold the union together if you're Boris Johnson just by saying no way, never. But in the long run, we don't think that's going to be a sustainable strategy if the people of Scotland continue to vote for the SNP. You can't actually run a union based on Westminster simply saying to Scotland, no, you're going to remain within the union whether you like it or not. So we'll see how the politics plays out, but I don't think this issue is going to simply disappear because Boris says no.
Akash, I was talking to Boris Johnson's father, Stanley, about an hour ago, and he was saying that keeping the union together was going to be amongst his top priorities and that he'll do whatever he can to ensure that's the case. So if he's not going to grant the second referendum, how does he best play this, do you think?
Well, so this is the point I was making. I think there's a distinction between a sort of effective short-term mechanism for keeping the union together and a sensible long-term strategy. And I mean, what we've said in our paper is that probably holding a referendum on the SNP's proposed timetable, which is 2020, is unreasonable, unrealistic rather, and if this were to happen, it would be better to push it back anyway, just because of how long it takes to pass the legislation and have the campaign and think through all the issues and so on. So this would be something, if it did happen, probably sort of 2, 3 or maybe more years down the line. And in the meantime, we very much believe that Boris Johnson, the UK government, does have to take seriously the need to make a positive case for the union. In the end, Scotland's going to remain in the union only if Scottish voters believe that that's where their interests best lie. And the Brexit process has really called that into question for a lot of people because, yes, 62% of Scottish voters opposed Brexit. The Scottish Parliament didn't give its consent to the EU Withdrawal Act. The Scottish government wasn't really meaningfully involved in designing the Brexit strategy and so on. So there is a real risk, I think, that people in Scotland just think, well, we're in this country where our interests are being overlooked. So the UK government has to take that seriously. So I think they might want to think about maybe further devolution of powers, maybe other funding commitments, but also they might just really want to rethink some of the constitutional principles of the union and move towards a system where the powers of the devolved institutions in Edinburgh can't simply be overridden by Westminster, and there has to be a genuine partnership between the UK and Scottish governments, because otherwise, as I say, I just don't think this issue is going to disappear.
Yeah, and the harder and faster he pushes for leaving the EU to his pretty tight timetable, the more the momentum is going to grow, isn't it, within Scotland for that independence referendum. So I'm just wondering how that might impact the way in which the Prime Minister thinks about leaving the EU and the manner in which he does it in order to keep Scotland sort of not placated, but perhaps less angry than they would be otherwise.
Well, we've said all the way through the Brexit process, the Institute for Government has published lots of work on this, that the UK government really could have done better at various key points involving the devolved governments in the Brexit process. And probably they never would have agreed, let's be honest. But I think there were some unforced errors by the UK government in how it managed its relationships with Edinburgh and Cardiff too. As far as where we are now, so unless something dramatic happens, we are going to be leaving the EU, of course, in just over a month's time. And then we will enter into the negotiations on the future UK-EU relationship. And I think, that's an opportunity then for the Prime Minister to make a kind of offer to Edinburgh and Cardiff, and if we get a government back up and running in Belfast to them as well, to say, we want to involve you in the negotiating process with the EU. And to ensure that the particular devolved interests, particular economic sectors and so on, genuinely have a voice in that negotiation process in a way that they really don't feel they have had during the first phase of Brexit.
Well, we'll see what he does, won't we? Okay, Akash, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.